Welcome back, Cross Connectors, to Season 3 of Cross Connections. We're probably going to at some point stop calling them seasons. I mean, we will, but we won't introduce them that way. My name's Natalee Hill. I'm here, one of your hosts. I'm with
Elliot VanHoy
and Rick Morley.
And we're here to talk to you today about mystics and mysticism. And when I talk about mystic, I do not mean the place where you can get some great pizza and learn about naval history in southeastern Connecticut. Although that's a great place to visit.
Totally forgot about that place.
Mystic Pizza?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is actually a real pizza restaurant.
It is.
In addition to there being a movie by that name.
Okay.
Julia
They put
Roberts.
clams on the pizza?
I don't remember. That's
Is
not
that just a
something.
New
That's
Haven
not
thing?
something I would order.
Clam pizza? You're looking at Rick's looking at me blankly.
I am not aware of this clam.
I
pizza
have to be honest. Like, I'm from
phenomenon.
Connecticut. I lived there my whole life. I don't think I've ever had clams on my pizza.
But you've
I've
heard
had
of it.
clam fritters and clam strips, and they're delicious, but never clams on pizza.
Wow. Well,
Yeah,
okay.
we should totally take a Cross Connections trip to have some pizza. Maybe we'll have a mystical experience while we're there.
Yes. At that first bite, union with God.
Just transfigured before our eyes into the brilliant darkness.
So this episode's not about pizza.
I am
Fair.
amped. I'm amped about this episode. I have never been more
Yeah,
excited.
Rick was like a
for an
kid on
episode.
Christmas when he showed up this morning. He was like,
yeah.
"Wait, let's do it. Let's
I'm
start
like-
recording now."
I'm clicking my heels through the hallways. I'm ready to go.
Well, I hope you all are as excited as Rick is. We're gonna talk about mystics. What is a mystic? What makes somebody a mystic?
So let's just talk about the word itself.
Yeah.
It does not just come from Connecticut. It comes from a Greek word, a Greek word that's used in the New Testament. Paul uses it frequently. The word is mysterion, and it means mystery or secret. And mysticism broadly understands God as a mystery. And different mystics fall into that mystery in different ways. I would say that most mystics are people who had a mystical experience. They ended up having some experience of God that transcended the normal experience, and they went, wow, something happened here and this was incredible. And then they start seeing God as something larger than just a being who sits on their shoulder and tells them to do what's right and wrong.
Right. So this ties right into the first few episodes we've had this year with your closing comment there, Rick, that there's an experience of God that transcends God as just an object or a thing, aka like another being, meaning that there is something to God that is so much bigger than the metaphors, the words, the language that we use. One thing I want to say about mysticism as well is I think one of the things that can maybe set us astray is the very term mysticism and mystic. Mysticism as a noun for a movement, a group, a way of thinking, and mystic as a noun identifying someone in that group or movement was not used throughout the history of Christianity. When these people that we're going to talk about were writing, they were not like, oh, I'm a mystic and I had a mystic experience of God.
What do you want to be when you grow up?
I want to be a mystic.
Yeah, right.
So,
That's slightly not true because of the place in history of my mystic.
Right.
But
Okay. And mine as well. And we'll get there. But before this pre-17th century, this language was not used for the majority of Christian history. And so just one thing to note for listeners is the people we're going to name as examples that fall under this broad category, many of them were theologians, preachers, they were monastics, they were monks, nuns, and they were reading the Bible and they were trying to understand the Bible and they were trying to interpret and understand their experiences of God. It was not like, to your joke, Rick, of what do you want to be when you grow up? It was not like they were sitting around being like, oh, let me try to have a mystical experience of God. That way of categorizing this did not exist. With that being said, just an interesting note on the history of this word. the term mysticism was first used in the 17th century as a negative pejorative.
Yeah.
So remember 17th century, the time of Enlightenment, Kant, philosophy, mysticism was used to describe this ecstatic kind of emotionalism.
Right.
It was a bad thing.
People who are untethered to actual experience
Yes.
and the scientific world.
And rationality.
Yeah.
As you get into the 18th and 19th century, there becomes kind of a romanticization and psychologization of this term. It really begins to be understood as people seeking this ecstatic experience, this transformative experience. And I'm going to say a little bit more about that with my person later. And then into the 20th century, with the formalization of disciplines and theology in the university setting, it began to be studied as something just as a way to mark this movement despite its problems.
Yeah.
And I bring this up just to say, if anyone wants to check out resources on the history of mysticism, one of the great people is Bernard McGinn, McGinn. He teaches in Chicago. And he really demonstrates this history and shows sometimes this wording can lead us astray from what these people were really saying. And we'll talk more about that.
Yeah.
But just to name, sometimes we're going to use it throughout the podcast, but it might not be the most helpful descriptor for what was really going on with these people and what they were doing. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that. Some synonyms that might be helpful for people would be contemplation. This is really a word that gets used throughout a lot of Christian history. Contemplation of God, union with God. Another one, which we will talk about, and I will not spoil for Rick, is the via negativa, the negative way. And there's a term that Rick is going to introduce to us that got used in the early centuries.
But for now, it's a mystery.
But just to name, like, be careful as you're getting into this territory, reading about it, of this term mysticism and mystic. I think oftentimes it can lead us into thinking this is all about ecstatic experiences.
Yeah.
And when we talk about someone like Julian, this is yes and no. Yes and no.
Yeah. I mean, I think the experience, the ecstatic experience, I think is important. I think there are mystics, more modern mystics, want you to experience a mystical experience of God as they've experienced. The sort of original mystics back in the day had that experience, and whether they wanted you to have a similar experience or not was really immaterial. Is that they had this experience of a God that was so much larger than the God they typically heard about in church on Sunday, and they wanted to share that. Right. That God is not the super being, as we've been talking about it here on this podcast, but God is so much larger, and that's the thing that you need to get out of my experience.
Exactly. Yeah. And this is my point in the danger of the term. I think sometimes we think mysticism and mystics, and if we read them and if we follow them, it is going to produce this state of ecstatic experience in which finally we have union with God. We experience, overabundant love, peace, etc. And actually what we will find in many of these people labeled mystics is that the experiences they had with God, it's not as if this is some great synthesis on a grand scale where all of the scales drop away and they behold God and all of the answers are provided. But actually, so often what we find in these experiences is that contradictions actually heighten. And there's more, there's more we can say about that. And we're going to get into that with the cloud of unknowing, the ray of darkness, etc. But that, my point is, when we hear the word mystic and mysticism, I think escapism can be latent.
Oh, yeah.
This kind of escapist interiority of, psychological experience.
And where you don't need no book learning.
Yes.
Right. We're just going to get God sort of unfiltered and straight from the tap.
Yes. And one thing that's so interesting about the ancient mystics is they wrote a lot.
And they were smart.
And they were interpreting scripture. And And in fact, oftentimes what would happen, and not to denigrate in my comments the experience they had, but they would have this experience, oftentimes very brief, and they would reflect and write on it for years and years and years. So it just, it is not opposed to this intellectual kind of expanding on the experience that they had.
Right.
All right. So should we introduce our mystics? Are you
I
ready
think
for this?
so.
Was there some other background that we needed? Do we want to touch on some of?
Yeah, maybe just a few brief comments in terms of if we're going to use this categorization of mysticism and try to give some broad strokes of what it entails. I think if we were going to ground it scripturally, one verse one could turn to would be Galatians 2:20, where Paul says, "It's no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me."
Yeah.
And this should come as maybe not too much of a surprise to people. The Greek word for I that Paul is using there is one we use all the time. It's just ego.
Yeah.
And I think one thing that Christian mysticism and really mysticism across the board is wrestling with is an attempt to overcome the ego. There, across the mystics, there can be very much a sense of a false self, of a self that is bound up in the traditions and cultures and understandings of its time. And this is where I mean that kind of the contradictions in these experiences. Oftentimes what happens for the mystics is in this experience that overcomes their ego, there is a breaking down of their assumptions, their ways of thinking about God, the received traditions they have. This is why the mystics are often persecuted by the church, because the church really sometimes views them as a threat of like,
Totally.
you are challenging established tradition and doctrines.
Mm-hmm.
Paul's a great example. I mean, Paul is absolutely a mystic, and Paul's writings can be so heady that I think modern interpreters, we just go like, okay, how does he describe God? What do I need to do? What's the ABC? Do this, do that, and then I get this. And Paul's thing is so much larger, right? And Paul's the one who talks about the mystery of Christ.
Yep.
He talks about this reality of being in Christ, on Christo. And when you're in Christ, crazy things happen, like the distinction between Jew and Gentile and slave and free and male and female completely fall apart. And in Christ, towards the end of Galatians, he says, I bear on my body the marks, the wounds, the brands of Christ.
Yeah, the stigmata.
The same marks that Christ had on the cross are carried in Paul's body. That's not just a simple, I'm going to learn something about God and you file that away because it's interesting. It's Christ living so close to me that Christ is in me and through me.
Yeah, there's an experiential, existential connection, experience. That example with Paul is so good that I'm so glad you said that, Rick, because the other kind of broad movement I was going to say you find within these set of authors and movements and thinkers is a breaking down through these experiences of dualisms and binaries. And you talk about that with Paul, with male and female, Jew and Greek, slave and free.
Right.
And I think that is really pivotal. And especially the primary dualism being God and me. And this is where the mystics can get really wild, where there becomes a breaking down of that distance, that in the experience, there's an awakening to love and God's presence in us and our presence in God.
Yeah, and the world's categories just fall apart.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's a really wonderful book I was going to bring up in this introduction, written actually of all things by a British philosopher. He's not a theologian. He's not a Christian. His name's Simon Critchley. And he wrote a book recently called Mysticism. I brought it here with me. And the way he talks about this is one of the big movements in mysticism is this idea of releasement and detachment. And this is how he describes it. Releasement and detachment are a form of ecstasy, yes, an open looseness, but also a relaxed intensity where both concepts of the soul and God can be seen to dissolve into something stranger and yet simpler. An experience of freedom, which is not freedom of the will, but freedom from the will. And there's that connection to like egocentric, me, my will, my will, my will. But that as you have this experience of what he calls releasement, detachment, which are kind of ironic words to use because what happens, he's describing, is there's this dissolving of separation between my soul and God. And we'll talk about our mystics. Each of us brought a mystic today, but I think we'll see that in the people we bring and the way they describe experience with God. Like, it's not as if God is up there, somewhere far away and I'm here. That really begins to disappear.
Yep.
Great.
Awesome.
All right. So, Rick, are you going to go first? Who's your mystic?
So my mystic is the pseudo-Dionysius.
The additional question is, where do they fit in Christian history, time frame?
So let me just say a couple things. So he's a late 5th, early 6th century mystic.
He's got a strange name.
I was going to say.
He does have a strange name. I know the next question we're going to ask is, tell us about his life. So I'm going to save some of those details there. But,
okay. What was going on?
Pseudo-Dionysius.
What was going on? So in terms of where he fits in Christian history, you said 5th, 6th century.
Yep.
What was going on in the world he was in? Where was he roughly? I mean, is he in America? Is he in Africa?
Yeah, he's not in America.
Sounds
not in
Greek.
Africa. Okay, so he is. We know nothing about him personally at all. His name is the pseudo-Dionysius. Pseudo just means false. And so he's the not Dionysius. In Acts 17, there's a guy called Dionysius the Areopagite who has a conversion and is a philosopher and comes to Jesus. And so he writes as if he's this person. He is absolutely not this person. We know that he is writing in the 5th, 6th century because he's deeply relying on a philosopher whose name is Proclus, who lived at the end of the 5th century. And so he couldn't have been using Proclus's work unless he was after him.
Proclus sounds like broccoli. That starts with a P. Proclus.
Natalee's hungry today. Pizza, broccoli. We're like over here talking about altered interior states, and Natalee's like, man, I could use some food.
I don't know. Good food brings me altered interior states.
So this is a time in the world where the church is no longer under persecution. We are running the show. It's the time of the imperial church.
Yep.
The church is running the empire. And that really disturbs a lot of people because they were used to the church being this like guerrilla movement. And so a bunch of people move out to the desert to become monks. And this guy, we don't know if he was a monk, but we assume he wasn't. But he takes a very similar turn into away from the empire and towards God. Another thing happening in the church is that we've had the Nicene Council, we've had the First Council of Constantinople, and we've had the Council of Chalcedon. These things that are about like defining God, who is Jesus, who is the Holy Spirit, what is the Trinity, all these like deep like theological questions that had to be answered by the early church. And now all of those questions are sort of answered. And so we know all these things about God, and the pseudo-Dionysius is like, yeah, we know a lot, but let's get back to experiencing God.
We know a lot, but do we know a lot? It's like that's kind of interesting. It was like they said,
I hear you all saying a lot of words,
but
like, is there anything behind that? The last thing I'll just say is that it's a high time for philosophy, and Neoplatonism, which we've talked about in the last several episodes, is at its height. The pseudo-Dionysius is like the Christian who brings in Neoplatonism into Christianity, sort of baptizes it, and uses the same philosophical schemes to talk about who God is. So,
good stuff. So we got pseudo-Dionysius. Who'd you bring, Natalee?
I brought Evelyn Underhill.
All right.
She's a saint in the Episcopal Church, if you didn't know that. She is she was born in the late 1800s, died in 1941, lived in England, and she was quite the writer. She was a writer, a teacher, a poet, and a mystic.
Good stuff. All right.
It's just kind of just a quick bit on her.
So I brought Thomas Merton. Merton is a Catholic Cistercian, aka Trappist monk, and we'll talk more about that. But he was born in 1915 in France, and one of the reasons I chose him, I did not know this, though I've read Merton and about Merton, is he was baptized because of his father,
Episcopalian,
into the Church of England. So he's a good person to bring today.
Yes, I think I failed to mention that even she was Anglican. Well, she became Anglican.
Okay.
She had a development of her thought over time.
Okay.
Spiritual thought over time.
So Merton, in terms of where he fits in Christian history, I think is a great person for people that might want to get into this topic in a more relatable way, because he lived through the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, the 60s. He died in 68. And so much was happening in the world and in the church that is a little more familiar to us, right? Not that we can't read people like pseudo-Dionysius or, Meister Eckhart from the 14th and 15th century Germany, but it takes a little bit more work. So Merton is a great entryway, especially as American listeners and readers, to kind of learn about this. And his work is very, very accessible, his writings.
I saw a picture of him on social media the other day, and he's standing there in a jean jacket. And I mean, you could have sworn that picture was taken yesterday.
Absolutely.
The pseudo-Dionysius is really hard to kind of wrap your head around, but Thomas Merton, you could go have a beer with that guy, and he would have a good time.
Exactly.
That's funny.
So
Evelyn, because she's more modern, not quite as modern as Thomas, I think you can also kind of relate to, but there are bits of, especially her early work in writing, that's a little bit heady. And
So can you give us a snapshot, Natalie, of her life history story?
Sure. So she was born in 1875, and she wasn't raised with a lot of spiritual or Christian background. She was married. She did not take her husband's name. Her husband was Hubert Stewart Moore, but her husband and her father were both London barristers. They wrote, so she also became a writer. Nobody in her life was really interested in faith or spirituality like she was. She, early on, was kind of agnostic. Then she got into Neoplatonianism.
As one does.
I guess, as one does. She, over her life, was really interested in Catholicism, Roman Catholicism, and was interested in potentially becoming a member of the Catholic Church. But her husband, who was Protestant, was really against that. So she didn't, which... she continued to pursue some of the Catholic thinkers, but she found her way into Anglicanism eventually, in part because of the things that it shared with Roman Catholicism. But it took her some time to find her way to Anglicanism because of the way that she thought. At the time, psychology was big. We talked about mysticism combining with psychology and whatnot. That was sort of some of what was going on in her era, and her excitement for the things that combined the mysterious, the psychic, the psychological, all of those things didn't seem to fit with the Anglican Church at the time. Can you imagine that wouldn't fit with the Anglican Church at the time?
Yeah.
So her big writing was a book that's called Mysticism that was published in 1911. It's the thing she's most well known for. It is huge. I have a copy of it that I borrowed from a friend.
Book.
It's a thick book. It's like 500 pages, and then there's all these appendices, and the print is really small. And I have to admit that I did not read this book. What I did read...
You didn't read 500 pages before the episode today?
Not since last week. No, I mean, I suppose I could have, in theoretically.
If you did nothing else.
I did read The Spiritual Life, which is actually a compilation of 4 radio talks that she gave.
Interesting. It's like C.S. Lewis.
Yeah.
That's how Mere Christianity came about.
Yeah.
Same era.
Yeah, same era almost.
Same era,
She would
yeah.
have been a little bit older.
Yeah. So the spiritual life and one of her other writings called Worship, those are from her later years. So the spiritual life is from talks she gave around Advent 1936.
Not much going on in the world at that time.
No, not much going on in the world at that time. And then her other one, Worship, was written around there. But so that's from like her later life. And from what I've read, mysticism from her early time and then her later writings are pretty different in their development.
Interesting.
She
As in she kind of contradicted or went back on.
Yeah, and there's even, I think this is the 12th edition that was mentioned. There's there's a preface to the 12th edition of Mysticism where she kind of talks about the way her thinking has changed since this thing came out.
Not to mention the 12th edition. Clearly she was busy revising this a lot of times if there's 12 editions.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So, being from 1875, she was mostly home educated, but she had 3 years at a private school, Folkestone. She eventually ended up studying things at King's College in London. She has an honorary doctorate of divinity from Aberdeen University and was made a fellow of King's College.
In her life?
In her life.
Wow.
I believe in her life.
So she was pretty popular.
She was the first woman to lecture to the clergy in the Church of England, the first woman officially to conduct spiritual retreats for the church. She's a big fan of spiritual retreats. She had some of her experiences on spiritual retreats that led to her theology and her writing. She was the first woman to establish ecumenical links between churches. As you heard, like she was really interested in the Roman Catholic Church for one thing. And the first woman, and one of the first women theologians to lecture in English colleges and universities, which she did frequently.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So kind of a cool person.
Kind of a cool person. Yeah.
Ahead of her time.
She did a lot of interesting things. She was married and from all accounts very happily married, but never had any children. She was a devoted wife, a devoted child, took care of her aging parents.
So was she working during this time, or was it more that it probably would have been the case she was being supported by her husband and doing these things extracurricularly almost?
Yeah. This was kind of more.
Like
she
cool
traveled.
life.
She traveled a lot. She got to know in India. So the other thing was that she was influenced by mysticism of other religions as well. She studied in India with a mystic who she lost track with. Where I'm trying to find his name.
But probably a Hindu mystic. Or maybe a
one
Buddhist.
of her most significant influences and important collaborations was with the Nobel laureate. I'm not going to get his name. Rabindranath Tagore?
Yeah.
An Indian
Tagore.
mystic. Yeah.
Einstein had a lot of dialogue with Tagore.
I don't know.
Yeah. They met together. I think you can look this up. It's spelled Tagore, right?
Tagore. Yep. Yeah. Mm-hmm. She was also in 1939 a member of the Anglican Pacifist Fellowship.
Wow.
So she did. She lived at a time when psychology was a big deal. She lived through World War I, and she was living into the beginning of World War II. She died in 1941. She survived the 1940 bombing of London, all of that, but then she had very poor health, and she ended up dying in 1941 before the end of the war.
Wow. And she would have been what, like 60?
Yes.
Like 1880s to 1940
right.
time frame.
Yeah.
Wow.
Not
cool
terribly,
person.
not terribly old, but yeah.
Very. Sounds like a fascinating life.
She was also the cousin of a bishop, an Anglican bishop.
Wow.
Francis Underhill was her cousin. Anyway.
Wow.
So yeah.
All right, Rick, you got lots to share about the life of pseudo-Dionysius.
I got nothing.
Whole lot of I know.
Seriously,
we do not know who this
idea.
person was.
He is a mystery.
Interestingly enough, we don't even necessarily know that he's a man.
We don't.
Right.
We literally know nothing about it.
I mean,
this person.
Probabilistically, it was, given the culture in the world.
Yeah.
Okay.
But we have talked before about anonymous
Yes.
authors sometimes
Intentionally,
right, being intentionally anonymous because they couldn't be known to be women.
Maybe
so who knows?
One fun fact about his life, you talked about how his name is taken from the book of Acts. And so when he wrote, he just wrote as Dionysius.
the Areopagite.
Yeah. And then it was later that they were like, no. We have
This
to
is
put
not him.
pseudo-Dionysius.
He was never known as pseudo.
No.
He was just Dionysius.
It was a little bit later, and people were like, all right, we know this is not Dionysius.
I do know the Eastern Orthodoxy considers him an actual saint. So they talk about Saint pseudo-Dionysius.
That is...
which is wild. And as soon as I heard that, I was like, oh, they're going to try and say this was actually the Dionysius from Acts 17.
Right.
But they're not. They're like, yeah, he lived after Proclus in 6th century, but they call him a saint. They know nothing about his
And you get to be a saint.
life, but
Just because of the writings.
Yeah.
Every time you say Dionysius, all I can think of is Dionysus, the Greek god
Yeah,
of
no, this is very different.
parties.
Yeah.
Yes.
Not quite. Though, yeah, spelled the same. I
And
think spelled the
psychology.
same. Though we are pronouncing them a little
Yeah.
differently. Dionysius. How'd you pronounce it again, Natalie?
Dionysius.
Say it
I
again.
pronounce it
Dionysus.
Dionysus.
Yeah.
Not Dionysius.
Well, let me give you a very quick speed run of Thomas Merton's life. A lot happened in this guy's life, given that he lived in the 20th century. So,
Yeah.
born in France in 1915. Dad was from New Zealand. Mom was from America. Baptized in the Church of England. He moves back to Queens in August of 1915, so still a baby. His mom dies of cancer when he's 6. In 1926, he's 11 and moves back to France to go to school. 2 years later, he moves to England, where then when he graduates high school, he enrolls in Clare College, Cambridge, to study French and Italian. Important to say, much like Natalee's Evelyn Underhill, did not really grow up in a significant spiritual or religious home at all. Mm-hmm. You can imagine his life was traumatic, might not be the right word, but troubled given his mom's death, moving around a lot. And that comes to a head when he's studying at Cambridge because he is quoted as having preferred loafing over studying. And I read that and I was like, I remember those days.
This is my dude.
It's like,
Gosh,
I can
this
identify.
sounds like my kids.
Yeah, I can identify with this
Teenagers.
guy. Unfortunately, all joking aside, while he was in Cambridge, he had a child with a woman out of wedlock. We know very little about this woman and child. It was something he was deeply ashamed of for his entire life. He rarely talked about it. In fact, on record, he denied twice in his life ever having a child, though we know that that's not true.
Wow.
There's a decent chance that they were killed in the bombings of London during World War II, but it's hard to say. But these are his college years. In fact, after this, it was so distressing for him.
His Episcopalian years?
Yeah, these were his Episcopalian years.
Okay.
So he drops out of Cambridge. He travels around Europe. He visits Rome. This is kind of an important beginning shift for him.
Yep.
In 1935, he enrolled at Columbia to study English. And after his visit to Rome and these things that happened through his 18 to mid-20s, he's searching. He has a sense that something is not right. And at Columbia, he's pursuing that through English and really looking mostly at medieval English. In fact, he writes his thesis on William Blake. So I thought that was pretty interesting. But in 1938, he graduates from Columbia with his bachelor's, and he meets in that summer a Hindu monk. So again, interesting comparisons with Underhill.
Yep.
And this is what's so fascinating about Thomas's conversion story is he doesn't meet a Christian monk. He meets a Hindu monk, and he's really impressed with this Hindu monk. And he asks the Hindu monk, like, what should I do? And you could think, like, at this point, he would maybe go to India, become a Hindu monk. But no, this Hindu monk tells him, read Augustine's Confessions and read The Imitation of Christ.
By Thomas A. Kempis.
Yes. And so Merton does this and gains a growing interest in Catholicism. That same year, 1938, he attends Mass at Corpus Christi Catholic Church near Columbia University. So that's in August.
I've been to that church.
Have you?
Yeah, yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah.
That's in August. You can just tell how intense this is for him because so he meets the monk in June. He goes to Corpus Christi Church in August. By November, he's baptized and confirmed. So a pretty quick process here. After this, he gets his MA in English, again on William Blake, and starts a PhD, which was going to be a continuation of his master's thesis on William Blake, but begins to discern a religious vocation. He just has this growing sense that he wants to continue to study Catholic tradition and in a way that is experiential. And so interestingly, he tries to become a Franciscan and begins applying to become a Franciscan and is rejected. And catch this. This is the reasons why he was rejected. He was too psychologically intense. He had a recent conversion, so there was some sense of like, all right, dude, you just converted. Again,
slow down.
Remember
Right.
how fast I said his
Slow your
conversion
roll.
experience
Yeah.
was?
Yeah.
And then his past sexual history, which he would have shared in these psychological screenings. And so he's devastated. Interestingly, the Franciscans are not an order that really separate from the world. If he had joined the Franciscans, he likely would have finished his PhD, probably had a secular job. So what does he do? He turns to the Trappists. Now, very quick history. The Trappists are known as the Trappists.
Cistercians.
They are called the Cistercians of the strict observance, different from the normal Cistercians.
Right.
They're a reform movement of the Cistercians, which started in France, which were themselves kind of a reform movement of the Benedictines.
Oh, my heavens.
So you start with the Benedictines, and then in France around 1000 AD, the Cistercians are a reform movement. Then in the 1700s, there is a reform movement again in France at La Trappe Monastery. And this is where the Cistercians of the strict observance began.
Why they're known as Trappists.
That's why they're known as Trappists, because of the monastery this starts at. The reason I'm saying all of this is because it's important to recognize the Trappists, in their name, strict observance, they are like, we need to be as strict as possible with the rule of St. Benedict. Manual labor, silence, retreat from the world. It is like when someone pictures in their head really strict Christian monks, that's Cistercians. Yeah, that's Trappists.
Okay.
So this is what Merton applies for and ends up becoming a part of. So in 1941, he arrives at the abbey that is very famously connected to him, the Abbey of Gethsemane. It's the biggest Cistercian abbey in North America. Of all places, it is in Kentucky, which is really fascinating.
Wow.
He arrives there in 1941. He takes binding vows in 1947. He publishes a spiritual autobiography around this time in 1948. Lots of people have heard of it. It's called The 7-Story Mountain.
Yep.
So to give you a sense of when he publishes this, the effects, it's a huge critical success. It sells over 150,000 copies within like a year. National Review publishes a list at the end of the 1940s on the 100 best nonfiction books of the 20th century, and this book is on it.
Yeah.
Keep in mind, this guy is 33 years old at this time, and is basically a monk rock star in 1950s America.
Wearing his jean jacket.
Wearing his jean
Rock
jacket.
star. Oh my goodness.
So just quickly, and we'll get into this with more questions. I don't want to focus so much time on Merton, but just an important point about his life. In the 1940s, when he becomes a Trappist monk, he's very focused on Catholicism and specifically monasticism as the answer to modern alienation. Is he has this sense of, I need to retreat from the world to live a life that is detached from the world in a monastery. He releases this spiritual autobiography that kind of shows how he got here. Much like Evelyn Underhill, Natalie, in the 1950s and 60s, he actually critiques his book, The 7-Story Mountain. He's like, the guy who wrote that book is not who I am anymore. Right. In fact, he's kind of like, people shouldn't really read it. So that's a plug for people that might think, oh, I'm going to go buy that book and read it. He's like, it presents way too easy and neat of a conversion story. Yeah. And it very much is this like retreat from the world. Monasticism is the answer. Silence is the answer. Contemplation, that is just like between me and God, is the answer. Yeah. As he gets into the 1950s and 60s, he becomes much more interested in the connection between contemplation and action. Obviously, all of these social movements are happening. World War II, the Holocaust, into the Civil Rights era, into Vietnam, into anti-war and pacifism concerns. Yeah. So interestingly, very similar to Underhill, removed from a few decades. So there's a lot more we could say about his life, but that's a big snapshot picture of his life and the trajectory that it took. Died in 1968, and he was only at that time 53 years old. dies in Thailand.
Yeah.
I'm going to talk a little bit later about a conspiracy theory about his death.
I can't wait to hear about this.
So we'll go there. But before we do,
don't
I
have any
want to
conspiracy
make sure
theories.
Rick can talk about pseudo-Dionysius since we've just been talking about lives. So maybe we talk a little bit about what drew you to this mystic in the first place, and how do they understand God and encounter with God?
Yeah. So for me, I love this guy or gal, whoever.
This person.
This person. I'm going to call him a guy.
Yeah,
He's mostly known.
We'll go with that.
He's the OG mystic. In fact, he's the.
I thought you just said Paul was.
Well, okay. he's actually the first. Pseudo-Dionysius is the first person that the word mystic is used to refer to.
Okay,
Right.
that's fair.
And he's the first person to use the word mystical when he writes mystical theology.
He's also the first person to ever use the word hierarchy.
Yeah.
So
Well, that's fun.
That's fun stuff. That'll get you on Jeopardy.
Have you had him over for dinner?
Not yet.
Studied under him?
It is frustrating that we don't know any details about him, but I do like that he sort of leaves his personality and background at the door and wants to point solely to the God who is beyond our grasp. He's also a via media guy. He's a middle way guy. So he, as I said, he lived right after the Council of Chalcedon, and the Council of Chalcedon followed with a huge split, a schism in the church that still exists to this day. You've heard me talk about my friends, the Coptic Orthodox monks. They are part of the tradition that splits away from the rest of Christianity over some theological definitions. And it was a huge rupture of the church. And so Pseudo-Dionysius is writing right after that, and he writes in a way, and people comment on this throughout Pseudo-Dionysian studies, that he writes in a way that speaks to both sides of the debate. And specifically leaves out categories that would have pleased one side or the other. And that his words sort of transcend the divisions of his own time, which I just really like.
Yeah.
He's also like the OG Anglican. So anyway, so how does he understand God? He's not an Anglican. Okay? He's not, but he is. He specifically says that God is not a being among beings, which is what we've talked about in terms of God as the ground of being. He says that God is the ultimate cause of all being or beings. That God is the ground of being. God is the one that which all being arises out of. He says, and I love this term, he says that God is shrouded in a brilliant darkness. He also uses the term the shadow of a ray.
Right.
So this guy's like a poet too.
Right.
I mean, it's just awesome.
And working with paradoxes.
Yeah.
Right? Like
Yeah.
a brilliant
darkness, a ray that has a shadow.
Right.
Like that just doesn't happen. I watched a YouTube video a while ago on this guy, and sometimes it was the theologian that was talking. You just saw his head talking. But when the theologian wasn't talking, he had like pictures and videos of black holes. Which is like all this light being sucked into this dark. I mean, it was like kind of the perfect metaphor.
That's a good metaphor
of what the Pseudo-Dionysius is talking about.
That makes me want to go rewatch Interstellar. Some great
I didn't see
imagery
that
of
one.
black holes in that movie.
Oh,
So
goodness.
he wants to get into like we can never fully understand God. We will never get there, but we can ascend into God. And so his whole thing is that the task of the Christian isn't to understand God or know things about God, but it is unity with God. And this is where he takes on the Neoplatonism of his time. So real quick, there's four things. Up at the top, at the very top of existence is the one. which Neoplatonists, pagan, Christian alike, will talk. It's the highest order, and that's what Christians would call God. God is the one. And then there's the nous, which is the mind, the intellect, the consciousness. If you're familiar with the Platonic realm of the forms, this is where the forms are. So this isn't like individual consciousness. It's not my consciousness. It's consciousness in general.
It's like capital M mind.
It's exactly right. And then there's this place called the soul or the psyche, which is also not like your soul or my soul, but it's like capital S soul. It's like the soul of the universe. And then there's the physical universe. So you have nous, you have the one, you have nous, you have the soul, and then you have the physical. And it's like everything's emanating out of the one, almost like the sun's light leaving the sun and passing through the solar system and arriving to Earth. But then Neoplatonists say that it's not just that the one comes here, but that we then return to the one. And so it's that little bit of light that reflects off the face of the earth back to the sun. And so he takes this Neoplatonist construction and says, this is Christianity. Like everything flows from God. Everything that is comes out of God. And like the sun, it's so brilliant you can't look at it, you can't see it, you can't touch it, taste it. But we return back to God, and that is the ultimate task of the Christian. And
Wow.
We don't know again anything about his life and faith, but there had to have been a story of like what experience he had. He's not just sitting there with scrolls and books of Neoplatonists like, oh, that's an interesting concept, I think I'll turn that around and use it for Christianity. Like he had to have had an experience of returning to the one and feeling unity in order to be able to write this.
So this is what's so interesting about you having chosen this person that, to remind listeners, you reminded us was the first person to be called a mystic. 500 AD. Their writing is not really about their personal experience.
Yeah.
Isn't that interesting?
But there had to have been a personal experience
of course,
for him to get there. But yeah.
Right.
So he's that mystic who's not just telling you to have, oh, I had this really powerful experience, I think you should have it too.
Yep.
He's saying, I had this really powerful experience of this God who is beyond, and I want you to know about this God who is beyond.
Yeah. He's trying to put into language his understanding of God, which you highlighted for us. Yeah. That was really helpful. Any follow-ups to that understanding of God? The chain of being thing is pretty interesting, right? That like it's really working along this spectrum of the one and the many, and how do we get from the one and the many, and then when we're in the many, how do we get back to the one? And that for him, these things are like strategies for union with God, is what I'm kind of hearing you say. Yeah.
And like, if you listen to mystics, and I don't know if you guys have any experience in your characters that you brought today, but like when mystics talk about their mystical experience, it's like being brought into the light. It's being subsumed into this larger thing. They'll have like an oceanic experience where they feel like they're floating in this large thing that is so much larger than themselves. And that is the individual going back to the one. In the pseudo-Dionysius conception.
I'm curious. So you just talked about this oceanic feeling, this journey back into the one, into light, the role of darkness for Dionysius.
Yeah, he has this whole thing on darkness and unknowability.
Right.
That God is completely shrouded from our ever knowing or understanding. I have a quote, and it's the line that I would recommend, and it's probably his most famous quote. It's from his book, The Mystical Theology. He says, "Leave behind you all that is perceived and understood, all that is not, and all that is." So leave all that behind. And with your understanding laid aside, strive upward as much as you can toward union with him who is beyond all being and all knowledge.
Wow. Which is, you read that and you're like, okay, how do you even do that?
Yeah.
But that's part of the paradox, usually at the center of mysticism, and it connects right to that stuff we said in the beginning about the ego, right?
Yep.
Like laying aside that understanding, laying aside your sense of self, and finding this connection with something primordial, something greater, something that is unknowable, darkness in some metaphorical sense.
Yeah.
Really helpful.
He's also, I mean, we should just do this now. Here's the word, the mysterious word that like he's the sort of founder of this thing called apophatic theology. Have we mentioned that before?
Not today.
Not today.
Yeah.
But we've said something about apophatic theology before.
So the apophatic or negative theology is that when you're trying to get to what God is, you strip away all that God isn't. So, for example, you can say that God is not a thing, right? God is not an object. God is not a being. God is not one being among other beings. And you keep stripping, God is not hate.
Right.
So it's framing how you talk about God by talking about what God is not.
Right.
Rather than by talking about what God is.
Its cousin is cataphatic theology, which we have. I don't know if we've used that term on the podcast yet.
Not really,
but we have done it because cataphatic is when you use the positive term, but then you qualify it. So we can say God is good. That's not something we need to strip away from God, but God is not good as we understand goodness. We talked about this last time, that God is father or parent, mother, but God is not parent, father, mother, like I'm a parent, like I'm a father, or like my father was. God is a perfect father.
Yeah.
And so
to put this in very simple terms, phasis from the Greek word phemi just means to say or speak. And the prepositions apo and kata really just mean yes and no.
Yep.
So like to say no is
say yes.
apophatic, to say yes is cataphatic. So affirmations of God versus negations of God, which I think Rick gave some really good ones when he was giving negations.
Yeah.
One comment I wanted to say about apophatic theology is Rick really helpfully demonstrated the way you are stripping away, right? Like these things where we would say God is not a thing, right? God's not an object. And this helps open up a new experience of God where we're not limiting God. There's this theologian, Dennis Turner. Annoyingly, Dennis is spelled Denys.
Yeah.
If anyone wants to look him up, taught at Yale Divinity School.
I'm sure that's not annoying for his mother.
No. And he wrote this book. The name of the book, if anyone wants to go buy it, it's a great book. It's not super large, is The Darkness of God, Negativity and Christian Mysticism. And he actually looks at pseudo-Dionysius. And here's a quote from that book that I've always loved. I think it's a really fascinating way of thinking about apophatic theology. His definition for it is the apophatic is the linguistic strategy of somehow showing by means of language that which lies beyond language. And so it's a really interesting note where sometimes you think apophatic is just like, oh, we can't say anything about God. And one of the things he says in that book is like, yeah, that's one way of understanding it. But another way is to say, actually, we can say lots of things about God, but we always recognize the way that language fails, which we talked about. If people go listen to our last episode, that's exactly what we talked about.
Yeah.
So an interesting way of doing theology, not something I think people today in our modern church culture, society are used to thinking in. In fact, I think many people find this kind of initially alarming.
Jarring.
Yeah. So
That sounds very godlike.
yeah, exactly. As Rick said, and this is one of my favorite quotes.
I mean, the sort of modern understanding of how humans relate to God, and it's a word that's not used in Scripture at all, but it's used throughout the church, is relationship. Right?
Yeah.
Like it's about having a personal relationship with God, a personal relationship with Jesus, which I totally co-sign. Like that's great. But when you start moving to a higher register of understanding God, like how do you have a personal relationship with a ray of brilliant darkness? Like it's just a little bit harder.
Yeah.
Also, what is a ray of brilliant darkness?
Yeah.
Like that sounds
Yep.
contradictory within itself.
Yeah.
Yeah. And in some ways, ironically, I think this fits really well with the Israelite command injunction to have no graven image of God.
Yeah.
That, there is this sense in which God is beyond every image, such that in that period, no image is allowed. In some sense, that's apophatic theology, but apophatic theology is also kind of an abundance of images, paradoxical images.
I once heard a series of lectures by the wife of one of the former deans of Canterbury Cathedral. So she lived on the grounds of Canterbury Cathedral for as long as her husband was dean. And so she would go hang out in the cathedral, as one does. And Canterbury Cathedral, if you've never been there, is just astounding. It's wonderful. But she'd say there are these, under each window and by each column and whatnot, there's little plaques on the wall. And what she said is that she would just sit in the cathedral and just watch people. And people would go from plaque to plaque. Instead of taking in this 1,000-year monolith that is just unbelievably incredible, the easier thing to do was just go to little plaque instead of stepping back and taking in the larger sight. That's the metaphor for we hang on to our little idols, the little things we turn God into, instead of stepping back and seeing the brilliant wholeness.
Yeah, that's a good one. So pseudo-Dionysius helps us step back and see the larger brilliance. So Evelyn Underhill, Natalee, how does she understand God?
So you were talking about what were their mystical insights. What she described her early mystical insights as abrupt experiences of the peaceful, undifferentiated plane of reality, like the still desert of the mystic. See, she's got something to refer to, in which there was no multiplicity nor need of explanation.
Huh.
Which sounds very just a still peacefulness, but there was nothing that it sounds like a oneness, right? No multiplicity. There wasn't her and something else. It was just,
oh, wow.
She
was part of that something else. So there was,
yeah. But there was also no need to explain anything. There wasn't, in the moment at least.
Right.
It's clear that these experiences she has are something that, as you said, of many mystics, she kept thinking about her whole life and trying to understand it and move towards. One of the things I thought was interesting when I was reading The Spiritual Life was that you could hear in Evelyn multiple understandings of God in a way. It's kind of going back to our episodes where we talked about Peter Rollins's different ways we understand God. She spent a lot of time in that hyper being sort of space, but on that edge of the ground of being sort of place. And then at times mentioning particular events. So you get a little bit of some injection of that kind of event understanding of God. Right. She says where we are. One of her descriptions is, we stand in a world completely penetrated by the living God, the abiding source and sum of reality. And she uses the term reality with a capital R a lot. One of the things that is interesting to me about Evelyn is that she talks about the accessibility of the mystical life to everyday people, which, so I said before, she kind of contradicts what I initially imagined. If I were going to picture a mystic,
they live in a monastery,
right?
Yeah,
or in a cave by themselves somewhere, right? Yeah. They live completely separate from society. They have these ecstatic revelations. They write about them, but that they'd be completely separate. Evelyn was not those things.
Yes. Yep.
She lived a completely, in some ways, a completely ordinary, wealthy wife of a lawyer in
English.
the English in the early 1900s life.
This is an everyday person, in a sense.
Yeah, in some ways, a very everyday person. And she talked about the ability to connect with God, the way she understood God, as this mostly being. I would say that she seems to have mostly a being concept of God. But again, that being that's more than being and is a source of thing and something that you can kind of be a part of. But you could do that any day, every day. And that actually we're called to, where does she say this? Our place is not in any of these locations. She talks about what we're doing with our lives, the specific like occupations, for example, of our lives. Our place is not that at all, because we ourselves form a part of the creative apparatus of God, or are at least meant to form a part of the creative apparatus of God. He made us in order to use us, and use us in the most profitable way for his purpose, not ours.
Yeah.
And to live a spiritual life means subordinating all other interests to that single fact. One of the things that's interesting, she talks about sometimes the thing that we're called to do is not the thing that we think we want to do. And she also talks about finding those moments. You know, she's got a lot of ground to base on, right? There's been hundreds of years of monks and other theologians and thinkers. She's clearly influenced by St. Augustine, among others. But she talks about people, you know, washing the dishes. And sometimes the washing of the dishes is a way to be in union with God.
Yes.
And in service to God's purpose and ends in the world. But that might look different for different people in different places.
There's like a real sense, it sounds like, for her, which I think you find in the mystics, of there isn't a division between secular and sacred.
Yeah.
Yes.
That even with what you read, like
Yes.
all things participate in God.
And becoming more aware of that for her is the spiritual life.
Right.
It's not a separating out
Yes.
from the world. It's not a separating out your spiritual life as something that's only inner. She calls that a falsity. I'm trying to find that exact quote, but she says we're wrong when we think that our spiritual life is separate from any other part of our life, that it is our life. It
So
is
good.
reality, our spiritual life. And that we should be fully informed in every single way and everything that we do, from the beginning of our day to how we, the further question of the relation of spiritual life to public life and politics comes in. It must mean, for all who take it seriously, judging public issues from the angle of eternity, never from that of national self-interest or expediency.
Whoa.
Very similar to Martin Luther King Jr.'s understanding of the higher law.
Yeah. She really believes that everything that we do is informed by our connection into God and to God's purposes for the world, not our purposes, but for what God is doing, and that we take part in the creativity of God.
There's a book that I don't even know, it's out of print now. It's called In the Midst of Chaos: Caring for Children as Spiritual Practice. And the opening chapter is all of these heartbreaking stories of young parents of young children who had an active spiritual life, and then they have this baby, and baby is crying all night and colicky and needing fed, and they're exhausted, and they go to their pastors and priests and say, what can I do to kind of keep my spiritual life up? And the answers they got over and over again fell into one of two camps. One is, forget about it, it's impossible. You just got to wait for your kid to get older, and then you can do that praying stuff again. Or, so your kid wakes up at 5 o'clock. Well, you get up at 4 o'clock and do your praying.
Right.
And the whole point of the book is that we, as parents, there's a miracle right in front of us, and it's our child, and it's in parenting that child that we can experience God, that is holy work, that we don't, the whole like Western understanding of spirituality is like the paragon is the hermit, the monk, in the monastery. But for those of us who aren't monks, and those of us, who have full lives, like we can't do that. But that doesn't mean that God abandons us and that God is unable to be experienced. So.
Yeah. One of the other things she says early in the spiritual life is any spiritual view which focuses attention on ourselves and puts the human creature with its small ideas and adventures in the center foreground is dangerous till we recognize its absurdity.
Preach.
Once again, speaking to that broad movement you find across these thinkers of dissolving the ego, right?
Yeah.
The focus on myself, what I can do, what I should be doing. I should wake up an hour earlier, work harder, pray more.
Right.
Kind of, you miss the point.
She does talk about people showing their values in what they do. Well, you don't have time for the spiritual life. It's like, well, then you're making it very clear that your little local things mean more to you than to God, which is all reality.
Right.
That is the only reality is our God and our connection with God.
Right. So this is one of the big charges leveled against a lot of quote unquote mystical writers by traditional church authorities, especially throughout Christian history, is to use a big church word that mysticism is pantheistic. So pantheistic just comes from the Greek words pan, which means all, and theistic, right, which just means God. And what you find in a lot of these writers, as we said at the beginning, and what you quoted so wonderfully, Natalee, is this dissolving of separation from God. And one of the things church authorities will do is be like, no, you're pantheistic, and this is leveled as a bad word, where it's like you're saying everything is God.
Yeah, and what I think the mystical response is, no, it's not pantheism, everything is God. It's panentheism, that God is in everything.
Right, absolutely. Which is a really big recognition.
Right.
To see God in all of these things, to see God in raising a child, right? To see God in nature, to see God in your vocation.
Yep.
Spirituality is not separate from the things and ways you're living your life. And that's, again, one of the dangers of this term, mysticism and mystic. We think it's these special people who go off and retreat into the desert. And that's not really what they're saying.
Except your guy.
Except my guy.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah. No, I'm trying to think. There was another
who did that, and then was like, wait, I missed the point. Actually,
well, and I think this is part of her development that Evelyn went through herself. And it talked about that there was one person who wrote of her who said, in her life, there's evidence of change and growth, movement from, this is in an essay by John R. Francis of the Evelyn Underhill Association.
Wow.
In Underhill's life itself, there's evidence of change and growth as well. Movement from an anti-institutional bias toward an affirmation of institutional Christianity, from Neoplatonianism toward an incarnational and sacramental life, from pride toward more humility, from elitism toward servanthood, from an individualistic spirituality toward a theistic and later Christocentric spirituality. I will say that one of the things that's big for Evelyn as well is the incarnation. She's very clear that the incarnation means that God is in us, and we like that.
Yes,
as she said, like that part, we are a part of that whole creation, and
back to Paul.
Right. And so you can kind of see why some of the information about her, it was clear she was extremely distressed by World War II.
Yeah.
And you could see that, like, if she believes so wholly in this incarnationalism, that she would see all this human suffering and and think of it as, that's God suffering.
Right.
Because we are all a part of God and all a part of one another and a part of creation. She didn't, creation was a part of that incarnation as well for her.
No kidding.
Yeah.
So Thomas Merton, though, he
Come
was
on.
into being separated until he decided that
Yeah.
separation wasn't good.
He had a hermitage. He had a hermitage.
He had a hermitage in the 50s. So even as he was making this transition, he thought he needed to go deeper into solitude.
Yep.
Part of that, actually, ironically, was conflict with the institutional authority of his abbey and the Trappists wanting to write more. So ironically, he was kind of bucking against the rules. But in terms of how Thomas understood God and our encounter with God, I think as we've elucidated through his biography early on, he very much did understand it as being separate, of silence, of encountering God through that silence. He was very trusting of these institutional authorities. He really did see monasticism as the way to experience God. And I think in that, what he would say, if we were using that 4 ways of talking about God, super being, hyper being, ground of being, and event, he was still kind of working with a black and white super being understanding of God early on in his monastic career.
Yeah.
As he developed, I think he moved more into that hyper being and ground of being. And it was interesting for you, Natalee. You can see how Thomas Merton was influenced by Evelyn Underhill and others in the monastic tradition, because he uses reality with a capital R. He uses source with a capital S.
Yep.
There is this, as he puts it, awakening to God as the source of all that is, that when our ego dissolves and we awaken to God as the source of all things, and this kind of panentheistic recognition, which Rick talked about, of God being in all, that we are opened up to a new sort of life, a new sort of action. The other thing in terms of how he thinks about God is, this goes right into this conversation. He says the contemplative, and he likes to use the word contemplative, which I think is a bit of a better word than mystic personally. But that's another conversation. He says the contemplative suffers the anguish of realizing that he no longer knows what God is. So again, this moment of the dark night, the ray of darkness, this experience which transcends our rationality and presupposed categories. He goes on to say, the contemplative may or may not mercifully realize that, after all, this is a great gain in terms of no longer knowing what God is, because God is not a what, not a thing. That is precisely one of the essential characteristics of contemplative experience, which we've talked about. He goes on to say, it sees that there is no what that can be called God. There is no such thing as God, because God is neither a what nor a thing, but a pure who. God is the thou before whom our inmost I springs into awareness. He is the I am before whom with our own most personal and inalienable voice we echo, I am. Whoa. And he's working with this story in Exodus of God revealing God's self as I am who I am, right?
Yeah.
That God's not a thing. God is not a being that we just know facts about, an object in the universe. God is the source of all that is and transcends those categories and is, as he says, pure who. So there's this, similar to pseudo-Dionysius, there's this moment where our preconceived understandings of God for Merton break down. And this is kind of what he had early on in his monastic career, this very rigid black and white, like God secures my certainty, my faith. If I go into the monastery, all of my pain and suffering and anguish will be, kind of put to bed. He had this very romantic understanding of monasticism. And it makes sense because he's coming into this after lots of turmoil in his own life. He's coming into it in the midst of the turmoil of the world, fathering a child, World War II. He comes into the monastery in Kentucky in 1941. In fact, his brother comes to the monastery. His brother's been drafted for World War II, comes to the monastery and is baptized a Catholic before he ships out for Europe.
Oh my goodness.
So, you can just imagine the way he was viewing this.
Did his brother die in the war?
I didn't find that out.
I wasn't sure if that was part of his...
In my research on his life, I did not look into that. That would be a really interesting question. I think his brother's name was John Paul. So maybe a listener can write in if we got any Merton readers out there, or you can just Google search it. I'm sure it comes right up in our world of immediately accessible knowledge and information.
We tap into the one.
Yeah, right. The one of the cloud of knowledge, our noose of the 21st century.
The brilliant darkness of...
But it's funny that you say brilliant
Black
darkness,
Mirror.
Rick, because he is articulating what pseudo-Dionysius is articulating, that before there is this union with God, this experience of God, there is actually this dark night of the soul, as St. John of the Cross says. And he uses that same language, Merton does. He says, right before what I was reading, he says there's a torment that is a kind of trial by fire in which we are compelled by the very light of invisible truth, which has reached us in the dark ray of contemplation, to examine, to doubt, and finally to reject all the prejudices and conventions that we have hitherto accepted as if they were dogmas. And so again, there's, I think, for this tradition, this group of thinkers and writers, there's this recognition that there's something about the ego that holds on to certainty, right? That we crave and love answers. We love black and white. We love knowing. And that actually the experience of God is first, again, to go back to Paul, kind of a purifying fire that has to strip those things away from us. And that can actually be a deeply contradictory, suffering, anguishing experience that's experienced as darkness, is experienced as, what if I don't know anything about God? What if God's not real? Like, doubt is a big part of the contemplative experience. And that was certainly a massive part of it for Merton. So that's a little bit about how he understands God and our experience of God. I definitely want to get into as well a little bit how he thinks through how contemplation calls us to live in the world.
Yeah, I mean, I would make a little bit of a distinction between mysticism and contemplation. I mean, they're in the same family, but contemplation is a prayer tool that, I mean, you can learn to contemplate, and contemplative prayer is a thing. You can look it up on Amazon. There's a million books that you can buy, and
we're on bookshop.org, stdavidschurch.org/bookshop.
Go right to the St. David's gift shop and find your book on contemplative prayer. But just because you can pray in a contemplative fashion does not necessarily mean you're going to have the mystic experience. Not everyone gets that. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I remember there was a adult forum, youth and adult forum that we did, I don't know, a year ago. I even forget what the topic was and who was leading it. But one of the questions that people were, we were asked to wrestle with at the tables was, when have you experienced God? When have you seen God? And then, like, I remember my table, like, sort of, we all turned to each other and everyone was like, I don't know. Like, I've never experienced, like, I've never had a booming voice or a bright shining light. Like,
right.
Not everyone has that thing, whereas anyone can learn how to pray contemplatively.
Right. So I would break it down maybe a little bit differently. I hear what you're saying, but if I was going to group these together, again, acknowledging the problems with the term mysticism and mystic, which we talked about at the beginning, I would just say contemplation is the verb. If mystic is the noun, what does a mystic do? They engage in contemplation. And even that framing is a bit dangerous for Merton, if we're going on the way Merton thinks about this, because it makes it sound like, as you just articulated it, Rick, contemplation is just something that we do. It's just a spiritual tool. Yeah. The way he frames it is to say contemplation is not, he says people use it like it's almost a magic word.
Yes.
Or if not magic, then inspirational, which is almost as bad, he says. And he says the disadvantage of the word contemplation as a verb, as I just kind of laid it out, is that it sounds like quote unquote something, an objective quality, a spiritual commodity even that one can procure, something that is good to have, something which, when possessed, liberates one from problems and from unhappiness, as if there were a new project to be undertaken among all the million other projects suggested to us in our lifetime to become contemplatives or to become mystics. And one of the things he says is like, we completely have to break down this framing of mysticism and contemplation, whatever word you want to use. For him, all of this is in the orbit of these are not commodities. These are not spiritual tools. This is, how could it be a spiritual tool when what we are trying to do is dissolve the self? Yeah. What do tools do but build the self up? So, you're completely right, Rick. Like if we're thinking of contemplation as just this way of praying, then we've really missed what this whole movement is about.
Yeah.
It can't just be this, go buy a book on, even this book, like he says about his own. The book I've been quoting from is a wonderful book by Merton called New Seeds of Contemplation.
Oh, yeah.
Interestingly, it's called New Seeds of Contemplation because he wrote a book before called Seeds of Contemplation and was like,
Volume 1.
And he was like, actually, I was wrong about a lot of stuff in this book, which again, I just find so inspiring in terms of the humility. And we saw this with Underhill and 12 editions of her book, right? The humility to be like, I've missed the mark. Talk about someone that is not narcissistic or egotistical. And that's one of the big shifts in this book is Merton early in his life was like, you can be a mystic. You can practice contemplation. And what he realized is if you're not careful, framing it in that way makes it just another spiritual project that's about me.
Something you can achieve,
attain,
get a certificate in and hang it on your wall.
Exactly. And this is why that whole concept of apophatic, of unknowing, of the cloud of darkness becomes really important for so many mystics.
Because it's unachievable.
Because it's unachievable. Like, and it's in that dissolution of thinking it's something you can do that an experience occurs, right?
Yeah.
And even that sounds paradoxical because then it's like, well, then you can do that. There's kind of an inherent paradox when we talk about these things where the ego is just like a tiger waiting in the wings, waiting to just jump and be like, all right, there you go again. Like you think you're going to accomplish this. You think you're going to do something spiritually triumphant.
What's interesting is it's so funny that people are like looking for a way to make sure that they have this experience when so many of the writings of these experiences, they weren't looking to have an experience. They just happened.
Right.
They just happened to people.
Right.
It's so trying to seek it out is almost
and like
it's against the point.
And where it happened for these people, and there's so many we could talk about across Christian history, is in some sense in their engagement with the world, right? You talked about that with Underhill of like this movement of contemplation is not a retreat. It's not an interiority. It's an engagement with the world that produces this existential depth, this awakening to what is capital R real, to the capital S source, right? It's in the contradictions, the messiness of life. The wonderful example Rick gave of like the baby and the parent, this miracle that's right in front of you. There's an awakening to that reality, right? I think it totally misses the mark to think it's just, let me retreat, let me think a lot, let me pray a lot. Not quite.
And go get a business card that says I'm a contemplative.
Absolutely. Right. Yeah, you have a great line, Rick, that I've heard you use quite a bit. We've probably used it in a podcast or something about a thinker that talks about how meditation, contemporary meditation, is often really just a kind of balm and opium for our life.
Yep.
You want to say a little bit about like you've explained this before?
Yeah, I mean, it's not my thought, but there's a sort of resurgence, particularly of like Buddhism in our world, and people are like really drawn to Buddhism, and then drawn to yoga and whatnot. And one of the critiques of those movements
which should be highlighted, like Western not critique.
This is not a critique
Eastern,
of right. But how we end up using it in our culture is to just assuage and be a balm to the anxiety and depression
Yep.
that is around us, instead of just dealing with the underlying things that are making us anxious and depressed.
Right.
That it becomes like just a Band-Aid.
It's like
to
a commodification.
to let us deal with the horrors that are our world,
Right.
instead of actually making our world better,
Right.
and a world that didn't produce as much anxiety.
You're right. Which, very importantly, this would be a whole nother podcast, but in the traditions of, take something like Buddhism, engaged Buddhism, like Thich Nhat Hanh, this is not the understanding of mindfulness, of meditation.
Right.
There's a wonderful book. I think it's written by an American Buddhist scholar. It's called McMindfulness.
Oh my.
And again,
goodness.
it's this idea of like, in America, the way take, say a Fortune 500 company is like, all right, everyone take a 10-minute mindfulness break today.
Oh, yeah.
Instead
Thanks.
of actually like, hey, maybe we're not going to work you for 80 hours a week. Right.
That's
my gosh.
ridiculous. I want you to know, at St. David's, we work 85 hours a week. So
We use lots of mindfulness.
There's no number of baths with your fancy bath salts that will undo the impact of your 80-hour
horrors of
work
your
week or
existence.
whatever it
Yes.
is. Like nothing you can do is going to stop the pain
Yes.
because that's not what that's
And so I think
there
this
to
is
do.
really important to say for so much of the Christian mystic tradition, and importantly other mystical traditions like Buddhism and Sufism and elsewhere, contemplation and action go hand in hand.
Yeah.
If anyone wants to go look it up, there's a great resource on this. Is a lot of Richard Rohr's work, but he started a group called the Center for Action and Contemplation, which I think just like perfectly summarizes that.
Thank
action,
you, Richard Rohr.
Action and
the
contemplation.
Jesuits call themselves contemplatives in the world.
Yep. But really, in a lot of ways, Merton was a champion of this idea in the 50s and 60s. And I love this line he has. He says, contemplation is no painkiller. What a holocaust takes place in the steady burning to ashes of old, worn out words, cliches, slogans, rationalizations. The worst of it is that even apparently holy conceptions are consumed along with all the rest. It's a terrible breaking and burning of idols, a purification of the sanctuary, so that the no graven thing may occupy the place that God has commanded to be left empty. And this idea that we are called to go out into the world as people who are, have had this experience of God, of holiness, and to make God's kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven, right?
Okay, that feels like a lot. I had opened to this page in the book from Evelyn Underhill. She talks about what the church's role in the world. Said the church is in the world to save the world. It is a tool of God for that purpose, not a comfortable religious club established in fine historical premises.
Come on.
Every one of its members is required, in one way or another, to cooperate with the Spirit in working for that great end, and much of this work will be done in secret and invisible ways. We are transmitters as well as receivers. Our contemplation and our action, our humble self-opening to God, keeping ourselves sensitive to His music and light, and our generous self-opening to our fellow creatures, keeping ourselves sensitive to their needs, ought to form one life, mediating between God and His world and bringing the saving power of the eternal into time. We are far from realizing all that human spirits can do for one another on spiritual levels if they will pay the price, how truly and really our souls interpenetrate, and how impossible and unchristian it is to keep ourselves to ourselves.
I think Merton was just basically plagiarizing Underhill. I think
I don't know if that's... I mean, but she's pulling from so many other people who came before her as well.
Well, I joke, but...
She names St. John of the Cross, St. Catherine of Siena. She mentioned Karl Barth in here somewhere.
Yep. Well, I joke, but it speaks to two things. One, the way there's this living tradition where they stand on the shoulders of one another. And two, the way that there is this experience that there's something true to it in that it is awakening these insights across time, across place, across culture, right?
Yeah. And to that, across culture, one of the things about Evelyn was the way that she was pulling, yes, Anglican, but she was pulling from so many other places and cooperating with so many other places, because though she was Anglican, though she was very Christocentric, especially by the end of her time, she saw that there was something that was much bigger than that.
Right. And led to interreligious dialogue.
Right.
So can I tell y'all, speaking of interreligious dialogue, my Thomas Merton conspiracy theory?
Yes,
please. Oh, I'm so excited for this.
I just said, notice how there's these connections across time, place, culture, even among Christian mysticism. And I think that speaks to the truth of this. So one thing that is unique about mysticism that we have not named yet is it seems to run through most religious traditions, whether that be Hinduism, Buddhism, Islam, and mystics seem to have noticed this. And so they begin to talk with one another, and they're like, wait a second. We're saying a lot of really similar things. And that's a whole nother podcast for a whole nother day of how we navigate that. But just like Underhill, Merton began to have this dialogue with Buddhism in the 60s. And, especially imagine the 60s, a lot's going on in Southeast Asia and in Vietnam, and a lot of injustice is going on, war, etc. And Merton gets permission in the late 1960s to travel to Southeast Asia and go to monasteries and to dialogue with Zen Buddhists. And he had written on Zen Buddhism. He has a book on Zen Buddhism that's really interesting called Zen and the Birds of Appetite. If anyone wants to go look that up, I have it here with me. They're welcome to come. If you're local, come by my office. You're welcome to come check it out. And so he's going on this tour, he's talking about this, and he's talking a lot about contemplation and action and the way these are seamlessly together, just like that Underhill quote. And he's connecting it to pacifism and to war and to things happening in Vietnam. And in 1968, he is found dead in Thailand in his hotel room. And I think it's the summer of 1968. I can't be specific about the month. I may have written it down here.
That he died?
That I don't have the month, but Thailand's a hot place. I'm sure it doesn't really matter what month of the year there is. But I say this because he's found on his bed in nothing but shorts, and there is a portable fan, like a floor fan, laying across his body with a frayed wire. And he's dead, and he's only 53. Granted, he's not the healthiest human being.
Yeah, right.
He had health issues before. He had surgery on his back. But it's a very strange death. And there's no autopsy that is done, which is a bit strange. And so they say his death is caused by electrocution of this floor fan. And then later reports say maybe it was heart failure. Maybe they were connected. Hard to say. But it's very strange. And as time goes on, and especially the milieu of the 60s, people begin to feel things aren't adding up here.
Yeah.
And maybe it looks like some of the documentation is a little fishy. Maybe it looks like things in the room or even his body or the fan were moved around. I won't summarize every little detail, but there's a fascinating book. Let me find it here. It's by a guy named Hugh Turley and David Martin, and they wrote a book called The Martyrdom of Thomas Merton, an Investigation. And they look at all of the available documents and basically are like, things aren't adding up here. And the idea is that because of Merton's pacifism, anti-war stuff on Vietnam, that the CIA assassinated him. Now I laugh, but that is not without historical precedent in this time period. And interestingly, again, an Episcopal connection to Merton. There is a former Catholic monk who became an Episcopal priest, still alive today. Listeners can go look him up. His name is Matthew Fox.
Oh, yeah.
And Matthew Fox was really influenced by Merton. He met Merton. He became a Catholic monk because of Merton. I think he was a Franciscan and later left to become an Episcopal priest. And he claims, if you believe him, he claims that he talked to CIA operatives from the 1960s that were stationed in Southeast Asia, and that they told him that they did, in fact, kill Thomas Merton. And basically told him, we had an insane amount of money and resources at the time. There was very little oversight. We could kind of do whatever we wanted and basically get away with it. And he's one of the leading figures in like Thomas Merton was assassinated. Now, I do want to say this is technically a conspiracy theory, meaning it is not the accepted historical view.
Yeah, sure.
It is not the view of majority historians. They would say there's just not enough evidence to make this kind of claim. Matthew Fox has said this, but he doesn't provide any sort of documentation. Obviously, he's getting this firsthand from these people. He's not at liberty, I suppose, to really document this in any meaningful way or
If
get
he
these
told you, you'd have to kill you.
Right, but it's a very fascinating conspiracy theory around this modern kind of saint, monk, mystic about a very, regardless of what happened, his death is very bizarre, very strange. To happen in Southeast Asia in this way. It's probably worth noting that at this time, he was making a lot of connections and comments on the relationship between Marxism and communism and monasticism.
Yeah.
He has this line at the time where he says, anyone that's read the Communist Manifesto knows that the ideological underpinning is from each according to his ability to each according to their need. This idea in communism that everyone will work as they're able and will receive as they need. And he has this line where he's like, he's critiquing it. He's like, that's not possible in communism, but that's what monasticism is. And he sees this kind of connection and overlap. And he's saying pretty radical things in the 60s. Let's just put it that way.
Well, a lot of people were.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of people were, right? And a lot of people got killed for saying radical things, whether you think that was by individuals or more systemic, depends on your historical bent, I think. But it is a fascinating conspiracy theory about a modern Christian.
I had to double check because you're like 1968. I'm like 68.
A lot of deaths
There's
in
a
68.
year. I was like, so I Googled. I'm like, okay, when did he die? It's Google has him listed as dying December 10th, 1968. Also that year, April 4th, 1968 is when Martin Luther King Jr. died, and June 5th, 1968 is when Bobby Kennedy died.
Yep.
So it was just like, wow, what a year.
I can't remember what year, but there's like Fred Hampton in Chicago.
69.
Yeah, 69.
December of 69. I looked that one up too.
Obviously, the big conspiracy theory, JFK. Lots of questions about involvement in that killing.
Interestingly, the pseudo-Dionysius is also a conspiracy theorist.
Really?
Yeah, because he's a flat earther.
That's awesome. That is awesome. So not a conspiracy theorist in his day.
No, in his day that would have
just
been
a normal guy.
A normal.
500. He's a normal guy.
But if you agree with everything he believes, like a good mystic, then you become a conspiracy theorist.
Yep.
That is awesome.
Oh,
that is so good.
All right. Should we just go
probably
around?
time to start wrapping it up, right?
My last question.
Yeah.
Is your mystic a saint of the Episcopal Church? And if so, what is their feast day?
You would have to tell me, actually.
Thomas Merton is.
The Episcopal Church has so many saints.
So we don't
Yes.
technically call them saints.
Right.
The Anglican Communion does not have a mechanism to make someone a saint.
Right.
However, we have people we commemorate.
Yes.
And Thomas Merton is one of them. Evelyn Underhill is one of them.
Yep.
I don't know if my guy is.
So, I mean, we maybe don't technically have saints, but that is how we refer to them, and we give them feast days as though that were the case.
They were saints.
Yes.
Yeah, very different though than Catholic saints in terms of like it is so rigorous to become a Catholic saint.
Right. Yeah,
Thomas Merton, I do not think is a Catholic saint. I could be wrong on that. Someone would have to fact check me.
I'm trying to check now. Evelyn Underhill is recognized on June 15th. That was the date of her death. So June 15th is her feast day, as it were.
The day after St. David's confirmation.
This year.
Yep.
Let me see. Legacy. Thomas Merton.
Rick, I know you've read some Thomas Merton. Did you know that he had a secret lover later in his life?
Secret love.
Did not know that either.
Yeah, somewhat. So, fun fact for people listening, if you go read about Thomas Merton, read some of his works, I highly recommend it. But an interesting autobiographical fact is he had back surgery in 1966, and he met this nurse, and she's only ever referred to as M, so we don't know who it is. Wow. But basically, he began meeting up with her And it was a very like conflictual thing for him because obviously he had these monastic Catholic vows where this was obviously forbidden.
Yeah, right.
But it was this moment of, for him, really experiencing love in a concrete way.
Yeah.
Which is just an interesting fact for him. But it also speaks to him, his period of turmoil, doubt in his life, questioning the institutions he was a part of.
Should we go around just real quick and just talk about really quickly what our mystic offers to us today?
Yes,
like
absolutely.
That to me, that seems like what Merton offers us. Like he is this monk.
Yep.
But he's also this real guy.
Yes. Yeah. So I think if I was there's so much Merton offers us today. If listeners were going to read one thing, I probably would recommend the book New Seeds of Contemplation.
Yeah.
Go check it out. It is very readable. But I think you're right, Rick. If anything, from a very broad view, what he offers us today is a very accessible and relevant entry into this understanding of Christian faith, bound up with contemplation, of awakening to God's presence. And I think the role for modern believers of anguish, of doubt, of not being sure, which feels to me so constitutive of modern faith as people living in and after, in some sense, modernity. One of my favorite things from Thomas Merton, and anyone can go look it up, is the Thomas Merton prayer, which I think just speaks to this so well, so beautifully. I've used it here at St. David's. It's really meant a lot to me in my own life and discernment. And I'll read it really quickly for people, and they can go look it up. It's the Merton prayer, and this is how it goes. My Lord God, I have no idea where I am going. I do not see the road ahead of me. I cannot know for certain where it will end, nor do I really know myself. And the fact that I think I am following your will does not mean that I am actually doing so. But I believe that the desire to please you does in fact please you. And I hope that I have that desire in all that I am doing. I hope that I will never do anything apart from that desire. And I know that if I do this, you will lead me by the right road, though I may know nothing about it. Therefore will I trust you always, though I may seem to be lost and in the shadow of death. I will not fear, for you are ever with me, and you will never leave me to face my perils alone. And I feel like that just summarizes. I mean, that summarizes so much of mysticism, of Merton, this sense of unknowing, this anguish of thinking you know God, but maybe I don't. Maybe I've misunderstood. Maybe I'm wrong. And yet, beyond the cloud of unknowing, a deeper union and trust, right? That it ends with, you will never leave me to face my perils alone. But it's not. There's a way of thinking that, of saying that, of understanding that is this certitude, this triumphalistic faith, this I have the answers, and that's the complete opposite of what it is for Merton and for mysticism as a whole. So I think what he offers us today is a path for faith in the midst of modern life, in the midst of doubt, that is open to our own anguish and open to the anguish of the world around us, and calls us to action, to love. For Merton, the foundation of everything is love. God's love for us, our love for God, and our love for all things that God is in, which is our neighbor and our brother, our sister, the face of the stranger. So like Matthew 25.
The beginning of his book, No Man is an Island, is a treatise on love, and it is incredible.
Absolutely.
It's straight fire.
So what is pseudo-Dionysius and Evelyn Underhill?
I would say, like, two of the issues with the church today is we can tend to say, oh, I have a spiritual life, and then I have a religious life, or I have a church life, and then I have my work life, and we separate those things out. The other temptation of the church is to get super heady, and there's like a proliferation of headiness, especially with there's these podcasts.
Who would ever fall into that temptation?
I don't know what you're talking about.
Who
gets heady about pseudo-Dionysius and apophatic and cataphatic? I can't even say
So,
it.
I mean, pseudo-Dionysius does not come as a country bumpkin, right? Like, he's incredibly brilliant man who's synthesizing the philosophy of his day. I mean, just incredible. But the whole thing for him is about union with God, which does not require a PhD. In fact, he specifically says we can't know anything, and anything we do know is probably wrong. And the only thing we need to work for is union with that thing that is no thing, and that is greater than all things. One of the other temptations of the church, and it's one of the temptations of the church that I'm like wrestling with now, is there's a big sort of movement about people like not wanting to mix church and politics. And sometimes because like their politics doesn't jive with the politics of the church, or just because we're so fatigued by the 24-hour news cycle that like we just want to like church to be a place of peace and refuge from all that stuff. But unity with God means bringing all of us to God. We don't get to like, oh, I'll bring the spiritual side of me into union with God. No, unity means you bring the whole thing, even our political views. And when we seek and perhaps even find momentarily union with God, we might all find that some of our political or ideological views need to be left behind. So,
good stuff.
Yeah.
A word from the pseudo-Dionysius.
Who knew a 500 CE seeming monk would give us that message? But he does.
Yeah. I think that what we would learn from Evelyn Underhill is a lot the same of that. One of the things that we know about Evelyn is that she was not separated from the world. And so she reminds us that we don't have to be separate from the world, separate from other people in order to live a spiritual life. And she brings maybe brought it back. Maybe there was a loss of that somewhere along the line in the history of spirituality, mysticism. She did use mysticism as a word for a long time and then changed it to spirituality because she felt it was a little bit more understandable, like easier, accessible for people. And so you can tell that she cared about this being something that everybody could access because she really believed it was something that we could access because it's there. It's everywhere. It is, the only reality. Which actually she gets from St. Augustine. In the back of her book, there's a St. Augustine quote: God is the only reality, and we are only real insofar as we are in his order and he in us.
Yeah. It's like that line from Acts, in God we live and move and have our being.
Yeah. So I think she reminds us that everyday people, every day people, every day of their days can find connection with God and with one another and with the greater call to bringing God's kingdom on earth as in heaven. And she's also just a reminder that there are a lot of different faces to mysticism, to faith, and a lot of different people that we can learn from within our own faith tradition and without our own faith tradition. And that God continues speaking to us, not just in the Bible, but continues to speak to people today, and it keeps us, looking, watching for that in every day thing that we do.
That's great. That's such a great reminder too. One last comment that I'd be remiss if we ended without saying the history of mysticism is so much. You can't tell this history without telling the history of the women involved in it. Oh, I'm so glad you brought Evelyn Underhill, since Rick and I both brought men. And of course there are men throughout this tradition, but we didn't even talk at all of us before the episode. We're talking about Julian of Norwich. And there's so many more. I was talking to
Joan
of Arc, Teresa of Avila, Hildegard from Germany, Marguerite Kemp, There's so many.
Yep.
And you said this when you were talking about Evelyn Underhill earlier, Natalie, about, the world she was in. She couldn't even teach at universities. You said something about she was like
one of the first. Yeah.
Julian was the first woman in the English language to write something that was recorded.
That we know was positively written by a woman.
Yeah, like that is insane.
As opposed to anonymous.
Right. Yeah. That is insane. That women have been really foundational to this. And more broadly with that point, that this whole tradition has been a tradition of people that they're not the priests. They're not the people in institutional power more often than not. They're the people on the outside they're kind of a gadfly. They're reminding us, like you just reminded us, Natalie, of like God is still speaking. God is doing this. God is calling us deeper into the world, into reality, to recognize the source. And thank God there were lots of women doing that. And in a time when people were like, you can't do this. Yep. You can't preach. You can't administer the sacraments.
Well,
Joan of Arc was burned at the stake.
Right. So, many of the women mystics were considered incredibly radical, more so, I think, than male mystics, because it was that much more, out of order for them to be. And
connection, if you didn't listen to our last episode, go listen to it on metaphors for God and feminine language of God, because one thing so many women mystics did and got them in huge trouble with the institutions of their day was they saw God in feminine metaphors.
Oh, yeah.
So speak of, getting...
Julian of Norwich, who says, Christ our mother.
Yep. So a great resource. I think I incredible. Said at the start of the episode, we'd give some resources and people to go look these people up, go read some of their writings. Julian's Revelations of Divine Love. There's lots to be had there.
Yeah, and I would definitely, if you're going to pick up an Evelyn Underhill, I would not pick up mysticism first. Maybe not even at all.
Unless you need like a door jam.
But pick up the Spiritual Life. And I'm curious, I haven't read Worship, but that's the other one from late in her time that you could pick up. There was this beautiful thing she said in here about when you're in communion, about like, it was a great anti-anxiety sort of a phrase. Where is this? So she's talking about the examples of various saints and their work in the world. And he says, here it is that we recognize their real character as various expressions in action of one life based on one conviction and desire. Thus, there is no tendency to snatch another person's work or dodge dull bits of their own, no cheapening sense of hurry or nervous anxiety about success. The action of those whose lives are given to the Spirit has in it something of the leisure of eternity, and because of this they achieve far more than those whose lives are enslaved by the rush and hurry, the unceasing tick-tock of the world.
That one hits home.
Yeah. So Julian of Norwich is known for saying, all shall be well, and all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well. And an influence on my life, who I failed probably to say anything in his time. There's a gentleman who I knew from when I worked at St. Martin in the Fields. His name is Scott Robinson. He died recently, sadly. Had a long-standing illness, fairly young, 61 years old. And he was deeply invested in the spiritual life. He was a member of the Order of St. Francis. And he, among other things, he also studied all kinds of different spiritualities, Buddhism and whatnot. He used to offer to St. Martin's New Year's Eve kirtan services. And he wrote music. And he wrote this one piece off of Julian of Norwich's All Shall Be Well. And it was just beautiful. It's a lovely thing to contemplate at times. It might be a great thing to use at a Taizé service sometime or something like that. It's one of those ones that has a repeating tune. And I will leave you with that. All shall be well, all shall be well, all shall be well, all shall be well. All shall be well, all shall be well, all shall be well, all shall be well.
Thanks, Natalee. Gorgeous.
Rest in peace, Scott. And we'll see you next week, folks. Thank you for listening to this episode of Cross Connections. If you didn't listen in last season, we went through and discussed the Bible from cover to cover. That's from Genesis to Revelation, and you can find all of those episodes up now wherever you listen to podcasts. Be sure to follow or like us on your favorite podcasting app to find us easily each week, or join our email list at stdavidschurch.org/crossconnections. We love getting your questions. Please call us at 484-588-5656 and leave a voicemail with your name, where you're from, and your question or comment. You can also email questions to us at crossconnections@stdavidschurch.org. If you like what you hear, please share this episode with your friends and rate us in Spotify and Apple Podcasts so other people can find us as well. And if you really love what you hear, we'd be ever so grateful if you would donate to St. David's Church. You can visit our website at stdavidschurch.org/giving and write Cross Connections in the memo line to indicate your support. Cross Connections is a ministry of St. David's Episcopal Church in Wayne, Pennsylvania, and is hosted by
Rick Morley,
Elliot VanHoy,
and Natalee Hill. Logo graphic design and podcast production by Natalee Hill. Stock media music provided by Marscott and Mood Mode Pond 5. You're welcome to learn more about all of St. David's worship and ministries at stdavidschurch.org. That's stdavidschurch.org. Thanks. See you next week.